I think we're going to have to title this interview, "What the Hell Happened to Journalism?" Okay, I'm reading your book, which is fantastic. I want to, just recommend it to everybody. It's an amazing compendium and some kind of unintuitive, necessarily, things about what has happened to journalism over the last, and you say it's much longer than 5 years, 10 years and longer. So let's just start with that question. What happened to journalism? And then we'll dig in after that.
All right. So the question really is, how far back do you want me to go? Because as you noted, we had this great awakening that's taken place over the last 10 years. But the pressures in journalism that allowed that to happen have been going on for much, much longer. So if you think about where American journalism started, it really began as a populist revolution in the 19th century. So two heroes, Benjamin Day and Joseph Pulitzer, they were two journalists who showed up on the scene at a time when America was deeply, deeply divided along income lines. It was the Gilded Age. America was about as unequal as it is today, if not a little bit more so. And these guys looked around them and they saw two things. They saw that all the newspapers were for the elites. There were political newspapers for the political elites, and there were economic newspapers for the economic elites. They also noticed something else, which was that the vast majority of working class and poor Americans, of which there were many, were very, very literate. But they just did not have anything to read, and so they started the penny press. They started selling newspapers for 1 penny apiece, and they got rich off of it because, of course, there are so many poor and working class people, and they were hungry for news about themselves. This was really the birth of American journalism. It was a populist revolution for and on behalf of and by working class Americans that took them up as a crusade. And what I like to say is that, there's not really a problem with partisan journalism as long as everybody's represented. As long as there are people who are partisan, who are creating news for everybody. The problem with today's media is that it is totally partisan on behalf of the elites. You have liberal media that's completely partisan on behalf of liberal elites and conservative media that's very partisan on behalf of conservative elites. How did that happen? Well, it happened throughout the course of the 20th century as journalists underwent a status revolution, essentially. So in 1937, the vast majority of American journalists did not have a college degree. Journalism was considered a working class trade. It was a blue-collar job that you picked up as you did it. You picked it up on the job. In 1937, a survey found that the elites of journalism, the Washington elites, only less than half of them had a college degree. Fast forward to 2015, and 92% of American journalists now have a college degree. In fact, that number is almost certainly higher today than it was in 2015. And along with this status revolution from blue-collar trade to highly, highly educated, essentially caste, you saw journalists shift their idea of who journalism was for and what it should be about. And the woke revolution that we're seeing is essentially the last stage in this status revolution among journalists. Essentially, I argue that the adoption of woke language, obsessing over white privilege, white supremacy, slavery, issues that are really not pressing in America the way that other issues are, like income inequality, that obsession masks the real class divide in America and the skyrocketing income inequality while allowing liberal and left-wing journalists to still feel like heroes, even as they contribute to the class chasm in America. That's kind of the long and the short of it.
This is so fascinating to me because, well, for starters, I think you just explained to me why the Epoch Times has been so successful lately.
Explain.
I think we're kind of doing what these two illustrious, penny-charging individuals did back in the day. Because our media is not for the elites, although there's some elites that follow it. When I came in here, the bartender looked at me and said, "American thought leaders. Oh, thanks so much for what you do."
That's
right?
amazing.
I was touched and I was honored by that. But anyway,
that's amazing. What an endorsement. Wow.
Bartenders, right?
Seriously.
No, and frankly, that happens a lot. And I feel very honored that that's the case, right? But I never thought about it the way you just described, right? Until reading your book.
Tell me more about how you do that, like what steps you take to ensure that your audience includes working class Americans, because that's what I want to hear about. That's what nobody else is doing.
Listen, so the weird thing, okay? The weird thing, I feel a little bit odd about the Epoch Times' recent success, because I feel like we're just doing what I understand journalism is supposed to do, which is reporting. I think in the intro, in one of the endorsements, Greg Lukianoff mentions this, right? He says something like, journalism has become a field where people are kind of shaping reality for others, or something to this tune, and that your book kind of explains that a little bit, whereas we don't do that, right? Our opinion is our opinion, journalism is journalism. So, but so few people are doing that, right? And that's what I see since you're interviewing me now for a moment. So I feel like there's this huge, let's call it a market, that's open for anybody who wants to do actual journalism. Well, we welcome that. Competition is healthy, right? But part of our success is simply because there's been an abdication of that role by the most illustrious media of our day, apparently.
Well, to me, what's really interesting is seeing that very often it's the conservative press that has the working class audience these days, that's catering to a viewer or a listener or a reader who they are imagining who doesn't have a college degree, whereas the vast majority of liberal media that's being produced is being produced for an ever smaller elite, an ever more highly educated elite. And I think that reflects political trends more widely, where if the Democrats used to be the party of the welders, and the lineman, right, and the factory worker, today they're the party asking those people to pay off the student loans of, dentists and accountants to the tune of $50,000, right? That's what the progressives are pushing, $50,000 in student loans, right? Who has $50,000 in student loans? It's not the linemen, right? Or they're pushing banning fracking, one of the few jobs left that creates upward mobility for working class Americans in the name of this sort of climate agenda. Or they're pushing defunding the police. I mean, who needs the police? It's working class people of color, the victims of crime, right? The victims of skyrocketing murder. And so I argue that the woke language, although it sounds like social justice, it's essentially an abandonment of the most vulnerable people of color, the most vulnerable Americans, the downwardly mobile, in the name of a social justice war that literally puts money in the pockets of liberal elites. And I'm saying this from the left, like I'm coming at this, I'm a left-wing populist, and I feel so disgusted with this, like with the magic trick that so many liberal journalists have been able to play on themselves, where they can literally stand there and ask working class people to pay off the student loans of the elites, right? Where they can literally, with a straight face, say, we're going to defund the police on behalf of people of color, the victims of the vast majority of homicides in America. So that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Absolutely fascinating. And I think that, your book isn't just about, I guess, the failure of journalism, which is what it's speaking to, or the wokening of journalism, but also about, exactly the kinds of realities that you're talking about here. There's so many of these pieces that are kind of interconnected here. So how exactly did this journalistic profession take on the woke agenda, for lack of a better term? Because it's not something that was obvious, at least to me, until maybe five years ago, I think, is the time when I really noticed it.
It's a great question. I want to just start by defining a little better what I mean by the woke agenda, because it is an agenda. But to me, police reform is not woke.
One would hope, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
But there is a woke variant of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important to point out, because conservatives know this, okay? Conservatives know that conservatives want police reform, right? Conservatives know that conservatives are worried about homelessness, right? Conservatives know that conservatives are worried about black school children in Baltimore in failing schools who have a GPA of 1.0, right? Conservatives know that they care about that. Liberals don't know that. So I have to be very clear when I say what is wokeness? To me, wokeness is the rebranding of racism away from actually caring about people of color, actually paying attention to the population we have most abandoned in this nation, the descendants of slaves. Like, it's rebranding caring about those people to a symbolic fight over whether America is a white supremacy, which does nothing to help people of color, right? Endless conversations about critical race theory, endless conversations about, if you're not anti-racist, you're racist, creating a binary where if you're not talking about race in every conversation, you are contributing to the problem, you are a racist. That's wokeness, is when it comes away from the populations that we have actually abandoned and becomes, contributing to an elite agenda that actually obfuscates the solutions to the real problems. So how did the media get woke?